Receipt imports, making life easier. Hi, my name is Tanya and I'm going to take you through this short course today in relation to the receipt imports function now available in Practice Management 11. Manually entering receipts into the APS database has been a function of the accounts team for a long time. Often this information has been available as a data download from your financial institutions. You may have your own spreadsheets that you're using to reconcile your current manual receipt entry process. With Practice Management 11, we are pleased to provide you an automated spreadsheet upload and allocation process for receipting. This will save you time of manual data entry for information that you may already have in a spreadsheet. The receipt import spreadsheet will look something like this. A very simple layout that you can copy and paste the values that you have from your data downloads and easily validate, save and upload this information into your database. I'll go through this process in a live demonstration shortly, but first let's look at the key requirements. You'll need minimum information of the import fields such as the receipt date, invoice number and the amount. The buttons at the top of the spreadsheet will allow you to then go through the process. The next step would be to validate the data. Let us do the work for you. We'll provide you appropriate messages in the spreadsheet which have warnings, i.e. something that you may want to double check, and errors. We cannot import data with errors. All warnings and errors will have a narration next to it so you know what to do. Once these have been validated and checked by yourself, you're now ready to import, save and import. Once that data has been imported, which will take a matter of seconds, you may then optionally go back and revalidate the data. This will populate the receipt ID at the end of your spreadsheet. It will also validate all the transactions have been imported. This spreadsheet could be copied to another workbook as a backup so you know what was entered. The final step will be to reset the data. This will clear the spreadsheet and be ready for the next import. At any time you can save and continue your work so you can come back into your spreadsheet. Let's now have a look at that save and import process, what exactly it does. In here we have our debtors receipt batches. You'll notice that there is an operator for this receipt batch called receipt import. The save and import function from your spreadsheet will split the transactions by entity. It will create batches, and in each batch it will have the relevant details, including the reference number being the invoice number, the amount that you supplied, and any other optional information that was in the spreadsheet. In this case we have a narration. It's created the receipt and it's also done the allocation for you for each receipt. In this example there was 241 transactions in this batch, so it saved a lot of time. So what are the configuration setup requirements? Well, firstly we suggest that you have a fee earner called receipt import or something similar. This will enable you to find the receipt batches quite quickly. We will need to update the system and user product settings for that fee earner ID for the receipt operator. And we also need to configure the macro-enabled workbook for your database connection strings. Let's take a look at those steps now. Let's open fee earners and create the receipt import fee earner. If you don't already have one of these or you don't have an existing user, then simply select the Add in the fee earner ribbon. Get the fee earner ID. In this case I have 1146. Open the system and user settings to set this fee earner ID for the receipt import. Select the system settings, open debtors, and the bottom on the right hand side you'll see the receipt import operator ID. Enter in the fee earner that you've just created. Now let's open the receipt import spreadsheet. The first time that you open this file, you'll need to press Alt and F11. This will open up the code. Within the code screen, you'll have the top right hand side the connection settings. And in here, you'll need to make sure that you're pointing to the correct server for your SQL server and also the correct SQL database. You may need help from your IT administrator with these connection strings if you are uncertain. You will also need to check which connection you're using. We've assumed a trusted connection in this instance, so it's set to blank. Once this is completed, save your worksheet. This has been completed as a once-off step. You should not need to change that Alt F11 code once it's been saved. We're now open in the spreadsheet, so let's go and have a look at these in more detail. We talked earlier about the required 3 fields, which are available here. There is an optional external reference field which will populate a narration. Then we have optional check fields. These items are items that you supply. For example, if your financial institution you also have a debtor ID in your data downloads, then you could include that in this import function. If you supply a debtor ID, we will go and check that against the invoice number that it is the right debtor for the right invoice. This will occur when we do the validation check. Likewise, if you had a debtor name or an entity ID or an entity name, these are fields that you are supplying and we will simply check that as part of the validation check. Moving across here, we also have the validation messages. So we have a validation message which will be OK, a warning or an error. A warning or an error will have a message, and then you'll have the final column, which is the column that APS will populate for an import ID and a receipt ID if you validate it after import. Up the top here we have our buttons that control the worksheet. The period start and end date will populate automatically once the validate data has been checked to get you the current debtors period. The import date will timestamp when the data was imported. So we have some pre-prepared data already in our spreadsheet here, and we're going to use the optional items for reference and a debtor ID. We're simply going to copy this information and populate this into cell A20 of the workbook. It's important that you paste the values so the format will look consistent, and it needs to be in row 20. If it's in row 21, it will not validate because it's not part of the table. Once you've put that information in, I will simply just hide these columns as we won't use that in this example. So we now have just the optional check, an optional reference, and a lot of data. There's over 580 transactions in this import. So our first step is to validate the data. You'll see that it will populate, and once it's finished, you'll see that we're in the current period of February 2018. Row 19 has filters, so we can look at our validation messages, and we can see here that we've got a number OK, we have a number that have warnings. So with the warning, it's giving you information to see if you need to double check this. In this case, the receipt is greater than the invoice outstanding. The invoice outstanding is only $15,900. However, our receipt amount is $17,000. So this gives you the option to go and validate and check that from your source data, was the invoice number correct. In this case it was, they have overpaid us $1,100, and we'll receipt that. With error messages, we cannot import data with an error. Okay, so if we had left this spreadsheet as is, and I simply hit save and import, you'll get an error message coming up saying that there is validation still has errors. So we cannot import at this point. We must go and correct the errors. So in this case we have one error where the validation of the debtor ID failed. The invoice debtor ID is 4469. So our import spreadsheet, we were expecting debtor ID 4440. So in this case it's given me an opportunity to go and check my source. Was the invoice number incorrect? Did my system simply have the wrong debtor ID? So you will need to correct this before it can be imported. and in this example it was the incorrect debtor ID. So I don't leave my filters on. When I do the next validation, I will make sure that there's no filters and revalidate the data. I now have only OKs and a warning, and that one warning, I'll just double check that it is still the one warning, is okay for me to proceed. So once I've done that, I'm now ready to import. So all I need to do is save and import this information. It will confirm the receipt import. Validation still has warnings. Are you sure you want to import the receipts? Yes, I do. At this point here, we have an import ID, which is part of the allocation process. It's not the receipt ID at this point. The import date is entered here. If I click on the validate data one last time, it will tell me now that the receipts have already been imported, and the revalidation will confirm the receipt ID and the amount allocated. So I now have a receipt ID. So at this point, you could copy and paste this into another workbook so that you have a reconciliation or audit trail of that process. And then to reuse the spreadsheet ready for your next import, simply select Reset Data. That's now been cleared, ready for the next use. Why don't we take a look at the debtors to see these imported. Opening up debtors, you will need to filter by your operator, and in this case we've used receipt import. You would then also potentially filter by your date for the date that you've entered the transactions or uploaded the transactions. In this case, our 588 transactions were split into 6 different entity ID batches. Each one of these batches can be opened, and you'll see here the very first one that I'm looking at in this batch was the one that provided the warning. So the receipt was for $17,000, but the amount outstanding, if we look at the allocation, was for $15,900. So in this case we have an unallocated amount of $1,100. You'll see here that the narration has successfully imported across from the additional optional field. So that all happened in a matter of seconds. So in summary, bulk uploading of receipts via Spreadsheet is available now in Practice Management 11. You'll need to complete your basic configuration, including a fee earner for your receipt operator, update that receipt operator in your system and user product settings, and also update the macro-enabled workbook by pressing that Alt F11 for the first time to put in your SQL credentials. The receipt date, invoice number and amount are the key items that you need from your financial institution's data download into a spreadsheet. Once you have that data, simply use your receipt import spreadsheet to validate that data, save and import it, let us do the work for you, then revalidate the data so you know that the receipts have been entered, and simply reset your spreadsheet to go again. We hope you find this will save you plenty of time from your manual process of entering receipts by using the automated upload of the spreadsheet function. Thank you for your time today and enjoy this feature.